Welcome everybody to the May meeting of the Bike Walk Commission. I guess strictly speaking, this is a special meeting. We moved it from last week, which was the scheduled date, because of some other city meetings, but I'm glad that everybody's here. The first thing on the agenda is introductions and public comment. So if this is your first time dialing into a Bike Walk meeting, I will give you priority if you want to introduce yourself or provide public comment or both. After that, I'll open it up to anybody who wants to introduce themselves or give public comment. Jack, it looks like Jack Pegler's hand is up. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah. Hello. I'd love to introduce myself. I don't know if I'm visible on the screen, but my name is Jack Pegler. I'm 16 years old. I'm a junior at GFA in Westport and a resident of resident of Darien. We're all residents of Connecticut. So walkability is an issue that I deeply care about. I can know, speaking from my own experience, that getting my license this past November was as if I was liberated. You know, I was finally able to travel to places in Darien, Norwalk on my own accord. And I know that's certainly, the situation for most young people my age in this country, except say for the people who live in major cities, which isn't the majority of young people in this country. So yeah, really happy to be here. Excited to learn more about what people can do to make our communities more walkable and livable. And yeah, just happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jack. I spoke with Jack on the phone last month. He reached out and found me and contacted me because I think he's doing a project at school around walkability, specifically around Connecticut Avenue. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, Connecticut Avenue in West Norwalk. So
that's awesome. So thanks for working on that, and thanks for joining our meeting today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Anybody else? Diane, your hand's up. Go ahead, Diane. Diane Loricelli, you're on the air.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't get in on the other panelists, but I thank you for inviting me. So I had to come in through the regular door. For the record, my name is Diane Loricella. I first wanted to congratulate the Bike Walk Commission on a really terrific event having to do with opening up the next phase of NRVT, and had a terrific time meeting old friends, and the ukulele folks were terrific, and I thought it was a really nice day. The weather, of course, matched it. So thank you for being part of that. I do have some thoughts about the upcoming zoning review. Because I'm not on panelist, I just wanted to suggest that whenever possible, for Mr. Kleppen and this group, relating to the zoning on your agenda, the updates. I'm very pleased that the city is updating our zoning regs. I do want to suggest, whenever possible, that we find out whether there could be overlays in certain parts of our city that would accommodate biking and walking, even safety. It has been done in other towns and communities across the country. The overlay, maybe we could incentivize it, but it would have to be something where adjoining site owners approve of modifications to the sidewalks or to the roadways in order to accommodate a safer and wider biking and walking experience. So I do remember when we first started looking at this, and this group was a task force, that some of us had thought having at least 3 or 4, no magic number, of east-west biking corridors and 3 to 4 or 5 north-south would make the city more accessible. I do think some of you have already suggested that. So I thank you for your time. I'll listen as long as I can and carry on. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Actually want to ask a quick follow-up question. Because just for the public, this is a special meeting, and as such, we're not allowed to deviate from the agenda. Greg, do you know, are there additional rules about members of the public participating in, like, during the sections of the meeting on other items? Like, do we need to get all of the public comment in now, or are we allowed to let people participate later?
As far as I mean, they could just make comments and then we just can't discuss anything further or vote on anything tonight as far as, any specific item is concerned. I mean, we have to stick to the items on the agenda. So
Yeah, but
we're
the
not gonna
public
have a
can
full-
participate as long as we stay on topic.
Yeah, on topic, yes. correct.
Okay, so let it be known, if you're a member of the public and you want to contribute later in the meeting, you're allowed to, but if you get off topic, we'll have to rein you in.
But I just want to make sure we stay on time with everything. I don't want to,
That too.
deviate,
Yes.
and have, 12 different conversations going on during the public comment period.
Yes, so in order to achieve that, I'll be prioritizing comments from commissioners, and we'll be getting pretty quickly to the agenda. But with that said, Diane, we can get more into your comments on zoning when we get to that point in the agenda. We had one other hand from Audrey. Audrey, is your hand still up?
Well, I could comment later during the, I was going to comment about the intersection at Route 1 in Belden. But I
see.
can
Okay,
do that when
yeah,
the agenda item comes up.
we'll do that. Awesome.
Okay.
Anybody else that has a public comment that they don't want to wait until the specific item on the agenda or introductions that people want to make? Alrighty, then without further ado and 2 minutes ahead of schedule, we will turn the time over to Steve Kleppen, the Director of Planning and Zoning for the City of Norwalk. Steve is going to walk us through the proposed zoning regulations and give us a chance to ask some questions. So go ahead, Steve.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me in tonight. All right, so I'm just going to walk you through, we've been giving the same kind of presentation out and about for the last couple of weeks now. So if you've seen one of them, I apologize if it's a little bit repetitive, but we're trying to keep a consistent message as we go through. So tonight I figured we would talk about kind of the purpose and intent of why we're doing the rezoning, big picture changes, some items that are more relevant to this commission, and also kind of the next steps in towards the public hearing and approval process, which will happen, we're thinking later in the fall of this year. So kind of why we're doing this. Presently, if anybody, I know Colin works with the zoning code quite a bit, and maybe others have looked at it as well. It's a really outdated and convoluted document. It was last updated over 30 years ago. Really needs a kind of refresher top to bottom. When we did the citywide plan in 2019, that was one of the major items that the consultant flagged, like, look, you really need to update your code. Not only is it just kind of out of date and not very user friendly, because if you ever look at it, there's certain things that you might need to know for a project you're working on, but it's in 3 different sections. So there's no, fluidity or connectivity between the two or various sections of the zoning. Presently, Norwalk has 31 zones, which includes 14 base zones plus over zones. So we needed to come up with something that was a little bit easier to regulate and handle. This is what the current zoning map looks like. Circled on the left is the legend, which shows all the zones. And then on the right is a blow up area of Main Ave corridor, just as an example, that just kind of shows you the pattern or lack thereof pattern of the existing zoning. So along the Main Ave corridor, you have this business zone, then you have a single family zone, then a 2-family zone, then a multifamily zone, back to a single family zone, back to another multifamily zone. So it's not really well thought out, to say the least. And I think it's a little bit confusing if you're just not used to using it. So
Steve, can I pause you quick?
certainly.
So the makeup of our commission and also the members of the public that tend to frequent our commission may not have hardly any experience with zoning. It might help to just define exactly what zoning is and maybe what zoning isn't.
Okay, we can do that. So zoning basically sets the rules of what you can do on your property in terms of the uses, in terms of what kind of buildings can go there, how tall the buildings can be, how big they can be, regulates parking, regulates traffic impacts. It can regulate design, height, probably some other things, but those are the kind of the principal things. So we've had zoning on the books since I believe the 1920s, but it hasn't had a comprehensive redo in over 30 years. So we've been taking a global look at things.
Thanks. I want to just additionally point out that what zoning isn't, and zoning does not stipulate exactly what the street design is, for example. So like Diane, I guess I'm speaking to your comment. The zoning code doesn't regulate like how many lanes there are in the street, or whether there's a bike lane, or how wide the sidewalk is. The city is actually working on that as well in parallel with the Complete Streets Design Guide project that they have. But the zoning code won't say to a property owner, you have to make the sidewalk this wide. And if I'm wrong, Steve, please correct me.
Yes, actually, we actually, in many of the zones, we do regulate the sidewalk with, we do it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, we do
Today I learned.
that, not the lane width, but on the sidewalks, and we do regulate that in many areas of the city. And the reason is because zoning has a lot of teeth. So if someone's coming in with a specific project in certain areas of the city, and we want it to conform to certain design guidelines or city standards, we write that right into the regulations or into the approval for that application.
And is that true of the proposed new regulations as well?
Yes, so those standards carry forth, and there's some additional areas I think I'll hit on a little bit later as well.
Okay, cool. Well, I will wait to see them.
So early on, I had mentioned the citywide plan. So the citywide plan in many other parts of the state is known as the Plan of Conservation and Development. That is a 10-year planning document the city is required to do every 10 years. And the last one we approved in 2019. That plan itself has what's known as the future land use map. And so it's a good practice to have your zoning align with the future land use map whenever possible. So that's another impetus to look at the zoning at this point in time. Some principles that we follow when we do our planning and then line up our zoning is we try to concentrate our development near transit locations, near existing infrastructure and employment centers. And we're going to talk about that a lot when you see what we did with some of the zoning. Another recommendation within the citywide plan was to look at a different model for our zoning. Right now, the existing zoning code is what's called Euclidean zoning, and that's based on an old court case from many years ago. And that Euclidean zoning is what a lot of municipalities in the state and the country use, and that really regulates the uses. And it's meant to make sure that I can't locate a slaughterhouse next to your house or put a gas station right next to your house. It's meant to kind of separate uses. But there's some better practices in place now, especially I think for urban areas. That's called form-based code. And what form-based code does, form-based code looks at the development as a whole in terms of what you experience on the street. If you're a pedestrian, it looks at the form and massing of the building, and it worries a little bit less about the uses. Now, that's not to say that we don't regulate the use, but because we do, but that's not the driving factor in what gets regulated and how. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about where we concentrate our development. Our main areas of development, kind of starting from north to south, is the North 7 area, which there's a new train platform scheduled to open pretty soon. On the east side of Glover Avenue is the city's largest concentration of Class A office space. The west side of Glover Avenue was approved for a large housing project last year, which probably will add another 1,200 units up there. Moving south, we have the West Ave Wall Street corridor, and south of there we have South Norwalk, which is seeing quite a bit of development. Our regulation proposes to combine that West Ave Wall Street corridor with the South Norwalk corridor, really looking to define the city's urban core. And then we have two other kind of sub areas where we focus development. One of those is a smaller area in East Norwalk, which is a much smaller scale than you'll see in the other areas. And also along that yellow line, which is the Route 1 corridor. And the zoning will hopefully over time kind of correct a lot of the problems that we have on Route 1 today. So what we've proposed is really a hybrid code of the Euclidean zoning, which I talked about, and we've left that alone for the city's kind of single family areas, and mainly where a lot of those areas are on septic. There's not the infrastructure in place, and they're really traditional for Norwalk larger lot single family zoning. But for the multifamily and commercial areas, we're looking at the form-based model. I'm going to show you a little bit of what that looks like in a minute. But the form-based model really relies heavily on graphics. There's a lot of charts in there. And, you know, while it's wholly different than what's on the books right now, and I think, you know, some of the reaction from people is just a little bit being overwhelmed because it's so different. But I think over time, it's going to play itself out to be simpler and easier to follow. So here's kind of an example. So something to point out too, if you haven't looked at the zoning, is all the existing zoning designations are disappearing. So right now we have what's called like the AAA zone, which is our single family largest lot zone. That zone is going away and it's being replaced by what's called CD 3L. And I'm going to show you why that's 3L in just a second, but CD stands for community districts. So we have community districts, which are the bulk of the zoning districts. We also have special districts, which are our industrial zones, the hospital zone. And we also have a civic district as well, which is meant to handle all municipal property. And that can run from state, city to the taxing districts. So each zone has a little preamble, which is the image on the left, where the image on the right is a sheet that would be the front sheet for each zone. And what this particular sheet is showing you, which has a lot of standard terminology to what we utilize today, it kind of regulates where you can put a building on your property. And it tells you how far it needs to be away from the property lines, how much of the lot it can occupy, and how tall it can be. So that's kind of standard throughout the zones. And it varies, you know, what's allowed varies from zone to zone. We also, and I'll blow this up a little later and I can show you what we also, we do regulate the use. I mentioned use isn't as much of a, or the deciding factor in the zoning. And I can't blow this up based on how they got the screen laid out, but I promise I'll show you afterwards. But if you can see this across the top, these are all the zoning districts proposed within the city. And then below, there's about a 20-page table, and I'll show you a zoom in, like I said, but it's broken down by the type of use. And this page happens to be the residential uses. So it tells you basically either it's this first box right here is NP. So that means it's not permitted. So you can't do that particular use, which is a boarding or rooming house in that zone. If it has a P, that means it's permitted. If it has a PL, that means it's permitted with limitations, and those limitations can range anything from like the square footage of that particular use is capped at a certain amount, or you have to have a certain dimensional size to your lot in order to have that, or there's other limitations as well. And the other designation is SPU, and that means it's a special permit use. So another nice feature of the regulations is it regulates the building typology. So all these different building types are defined, and there's graphics to show you what they are. So the top one right here is pretty simple. It's a cottage. And on the right-hand side, it tells you what zone it's in. I think that's pretty standard. And then beyond that, there's a page for each one of those, which kind of goes in a little more detail. So this one is a house. Again, it tells you what districts are allowed. It kind of gives a description of what a house is, and some of the rules that go along with the house, and some of the other limitations as well. So for big picture changes, and this is getting a little bit into the zoning weeds. So if anybody has any questions, I can't see your hand up, so just kind of shout out. So right, I had mentioned the AAA zone, that's being rezoned to what's called CD3L, which is the single family large lot zone. And that's really based on the fact that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of these areas don't have the infrastructure and their own private septic, oftentimes are on wells versus being on municipal water or city sewer. We've consolidated 2 other single-family zones as well as some portion of the B zone. And so just kind of a little bit backing up, the AAA is the largest zone we have right now for single family. The AA is the next largest, A is the next, and then we have B. And then there's also a C zone to make things more complicated. So we decided, there's way too many zones. The AA zone and the A zone really function the same, except for the area of the lot. So we've decided to combine those 2 zones, and that'll become the new CD3S zones. And one thing we're doing, which is getting a lot of conversation right now, a lot of questions and some concerns as well, is we've proposed to consolidate a portion of the B zone, which is basically a single family zone on a very small lot, with the C zone into what's called the CD3. And that would allow for 1 or 2 family. You don't have to do a 2, but it would allow for 1 or 2. And the reason we did that was because the B zone, the C zone today, they share a lot of the same characteristics in terms of the lot dimensions, and oftentimes they're in proximity to each other. So one of the goals of the citywide plan, and just, things have changed a lot, if you can recall back to 2019 already, about the thinking of, housing needs and housing choice and how we kind of function and live. So we've proposed to allow this zone where you can do 1 or 2 family to increase housing choice. And it has the potential to increase home ownership. We're not saying it will, but with a 2 family, you can have a duplex where you have ownership of both units. And that's a much cheaper entry point for someone just starting out on the home ownership scale. Another thing to consider with this combining of the 2 zones is that B zone already allows accessory dwelling units. So there is no increase in density. And if someone was going to propose a detached ADU versus a 2 family, there's a more uniform design that will come across with the 2 family zones. And the parking is more strictly regulated, where you can only park a new development to the side or the rear versus parking in the front, which you might see with an ADU now. I mentioned the increased home ownership, which we think is a major selling point of that zone. Some other big picture changes I talked about, we're consolidating the zoning between the Route 1 corridor north of Wall Street down through South Norwalk, which has kind of been the historic TOD boundary. Right now within that, there's over 6 overlapping zones. You can see from the image on we'll go right to left, the image on the right is the existing zoning. And like kind of the area we're talking about to the north kind of runs along east-west through here. The South Norwalk TOD zone is all the way down here. And you can just see the color palette of changes as you move north to south. And the odd thing is, for the most part, a lot of the rules are the same, or they're a little bit outdated. So what we've proposed, the image on the left shows, it's a consolidated zone kind of from north to south, and it'll have the same rules. It'll be a lot easier to regulate and a lot clearer for people to understand what's going on. Kind of smack dab in the middle of that is this green color. That's the civic zone. So those are either state parcels or city parcels, or perhaps they're a taxing district parcel as well. Some other changes we've put together. Right now we have a business number 1 and a business number 2 zone, and those run along between either Main Ave, Connecticut Ave, or Westport Ave. I'm not sure why there was ever a need for a business 1 or a business 2. So we've combined those 2 zones and made it it's what's called CD4C, which is a commercial zone. And over time, what I think the form-based code will allow, which our current zoning doesn't allow, will be a more uniform design, because all the parking for these developments is going to be required to be to the rear or the side. So the buildings are going to be closer to the street. The building design itself is going to be more consistent, and the signage is going to be consistent, because anybody who's obviously driven to the Westport line or the Darien line will tell you there's a vast difference between what you see when you hit the line for one of those 2 communities versus what you see in Norwalk. And the reason is we've allowed it to happen that way. So these new rules will, over time, in time, the way I'm speaking right now is, it could be 20 or 30 years as these sites redeveloped. Some other things we've done, we've consolidated some of the smaller lot multifamily zoning with the neighborhood business zone. And one thing that does, and I think it speaks directly to walkability, is while consolidating these zones, we've also allowed for small scale commercial in those. So someone can open up like a small restaurant, a small bodega, or they could do like a small retail space or something like that. And so that could lead to fewer car trips over time if some of those services that you need are within where you live. I mentioned the civic zone, and the intent of that is really to regulate city property. We've had several instances over the last couple of years where we've had school sites we wanted to, get permitted, and they ran smack dab in the middle of some of the residential zoning rules, which really weren't applicable to the school. So we ended up having to go for variance for like setbacks of 120 feet, which is really triple what you would require for a house. So we've tried to align that new zone to be more flexible for city projects, while also being very cognizant of impacts on neighbors. So I think we've achieved both of those things. You might see on the zoning map some areas labeled TBD. Those relate specifically to the waterfront areas where we have been working with Common Council on a few specific spots on how they'd like to see the zoning evolve over time. So we're working on that. And before this whole exercise gets, sorted out, we'll have the zoning related to that. Another thing that's kind of relevant to everybody who owns property in Norwalk, we're no longer regulating how tall a building is based on height, because people really don't know what height is and how to measure height. We're regulating it by the number of stories, because that's what you perceive when you kind of see things. Is usually there's a bottom, a top, and a middle to a structure. So that's how we're regulating things going forward. We're no longer regulating lot coverage, which is really what the building sits on the site. We're regulating what we do similar now to what we do in some of the commercial zones, where we regulate impervious surface coverage. So that could be your driveway, your walkway, any other impervious surface, patios, with the idea was it's really meant to cut down on the amount of potential blacktop you could put on your property and improve water quality over time. This is something that regulates to commercial properties only, something called floor area ratio, or FAR. And basically what that is a measure of how much building you have on a property. So it's like you add the first floor, the second floor, third floor, fourth floor, fifth floor, how many floors you have. And that's a ratio in comparison to lot area. It's really an antiquated practice. Really what regulates the amount of building on the property is how tall you let the building become and how much parking you require. So those are, more relevant metrics that we use. We have new standards related to lighting, because we really don't have any measures on lighting right now. We have a whole section on sustainability, and the commission is very interested in regulating it even more. So I think there'll be some additional measures done over the next couple of months. We have revisions to the flood zone regulations, increased public notification requirements for certain types of applications to the commissions. That's something we heard. We also are putting in some parking exemptions, which I'll talk about a little later, on Wall Street and Washington Street related to historic structures. And the goal of that is really to historic preservation versus demolition. There's also further parking reductions around mass transit. And these I mentioned a little earlier. This is kind of the Washington Street area. And so what we've tried to do is, for these historic properties are kind of like this yellowish color here, we've exempted them from parking so long as they don't tear the building down. Then they'd have to comply new, but for these properties, they would be exempt going forward from parking. Similar methodology applied to Water Street and a little bit of Commerce Street for these historic buildings, with the idea, and these are regulated also by lot size as well. And we tried to match up the historic buildings with the parking exemption. Some other items related to bikeability and walkability. I mentioned a big topic of conversation when we've been out doing conversations is the increase in where we're proposing to allow 2 families. And we've also taken some of those older 2-family zones and wrapped those into the multifamily zone. And we think by focusing those areas around infrastructure and transit and employment, and allowing some small scale commercial in that multifamily area, it hopefully over time will lead to less vehicle trips on the road. as well as providing some, additional avenues to home ownership and provide ability to walk to your employment center versus relying on a car. There's a provision in here about parking maximums, which I'll show you in a second, assuming I saved my slideshow correctly. And I mentioned the CD4 changes for allowing those small scale commercial and retail. And there's also required bicycle parking for multifamily, commercial, and industrial. I cut off the page number, but this is the chart that shows you basically based on how many dwelling units. For a multifamily dwelling, you need one bicycle parking space for every 10 units of housing proposed. There's also bike parking related to lodging uses, as well as commercial, office, and even industrial. So I mentioned the maximum parking maximum. So what we did was, because there are certain uses that really really push us to add additional parking above what the zoning code does. And a lot of communities do put in parking maximums. We didn't go so far as to have it be a stringent maximum. So what we said was, okay, if you're going to do more than the regulations allow or require, you're going to have to, put those spaces in as pervious spaces to improve water quality. So it's not functioning as a pure asphalt sheet of asphalt. Something I didn't include in the presentation, the commission is requiring that parking lots over a certain size have solar shading on those as well. And that's something they've been really pushing for with all the new developments and projects that come in. And so I'm going quicker than I actually thought I was going to go, just to give you a little bit of kind of the idea in the schedule. So we're in May already. So we've been doing these outreach meetings with the common council districts. We've done 3 already. We're doing, this meeting tonight is not a council district meeting, but it's a, city agency meeting. Wednesday night, we're at the 6th taxing district. And I think the following Monday, we're doing a neighborhood meeting with, I think Wilson Point area and some folks down Harbor Shores. No, maybe not Harbor Shores. We're working on that one. But some folks in South Norwalk. I have one with ENNA on Monday, and then District A, I think, is May 24th. And we have a couple of smaller ones on the docket as well. So we're doing meetings like this, as well as we're meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals, Harbor Management. And then as many times as Common Council wants us to come back and talk, we're willing to do that. On finalizing the dates, I should know by tomorrow or Wednesday, but we believe we're going to hold 2 public hearings just to solicit feedback, not to take any action, but to solicit feedback on June 21st and June 28th. So, we can't do anything in July, August when people are away. So I think the commission over July and August will review the comments and the changes that people are suggesting. And then towards the end of September, we'll have an additional hearing looking towards adoption with the effective date for the regulations of probably, I'm going to guess, January 1st of 2024. And if you'll give me just a minute, I want to show you where you can find everything. So if you get on to the City of Norwalk's page, so I have it.
Steve, I've got it pulled up here if that's easier.
You got it up? I almost got it. There we go.
Okay, cool. Go ahead.
So if you get onto the planning and zoning page, which is pretty easy to navigate to, on the left-hand side, there are a bunch of tabs. So the second one down is zoning regulations update. So you just click on that, and there's kind of like a preamble that tells you what we're doing and why. We're going to update this page this week or next we're going to link all the videos and the PowerPoints from the presentations and meetings we have, so people can go back and watch what we've been doing and get a sense of consistency, hopefully, between the meetings. And the next kind of section of the page are a series of information sheets. The first one is, what is form-based code and why are we doing this? So that provides a little bit of background and explanation. The next sheet is kind of like the building height and standards and what's different between the existing regulations and the old ones. There's information on why the proposed changes to the zoning map. There's another sheet that has the schedule of the meetings we have laid out, one on flood zones, one on changes to the Coastal Area Management Act, sustainability, One thing I forgot to mention, there's a whole section on grading and drainage, which we don't have in the regulations now. So a good example of how that comes into play, you live on a neighborhood where somebody knocks the house down next to you, they bring in all this dirt and they mound up the ground, and then now you're getting water that you never got for 40 years. There's a section in the regulations that tells them how high they can do the grading, what the steepness of the slope can be, and how that's all regulated. We've also provided, traditional email if you want to email us questions, but we've also got this, and there's a couple different areas to click where you can click on that and it takes you to this public input form. The first question is kind of like, okay, who are you? And then it asks you what section of the regulations your comment relates to, and then you can type in as much as you want below about what your question, concern, or comment is. What we're doing with that, as well as all the other comments we receive, is that's all going to get downloaded to a large spreadsheet where we're not going to edit anybody's comments. We're going to leave them exactly as they came in. Staff is going to provide a response to that. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll upload all those to the city's page so everyone can look at them. And then the planning and zoning can kind of look through those and see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So right below that is the actual regulations themselves. The bottom right tab is the complete draft. It's a really large
Steve,
document.
You're not sharing your screen. Are you meaning to share your screen?
Well, that would have helped, wouldn't it? I thought I was. Let's do that again, shall we? All right, is that better?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay. So this is the beginning piece, was the preamble. These were the information sheets I was talking about. I don't need to go back through those again, but you can click on any one of those and it kind of, just provides background information, gives you a little more information on those various topics. I mentioned the feedback form, but didn't show you the feedback form. So this is the who are you? What are you asking about? You can provide your comment. Just type that in right through here. And then down below that is the complete draft of the regulations, and here are all the various articles of the regulations. And the last thing to show you is the zoning map itself. So on the left is a static zoning map, which is basically what we do right now. And you can go on there and zoom in, zoom out, but it's just a PDF. We've also put this map together, which is an interactive map. As soon as it loads, a little kind of disclaimer is going to pop up and you just kind of click, yes, I understand. Then you go up top and you punch your address in. If somebody wants to volunteer an address, we can go and show you what your property zoning is going to change to, if it changes.
I'll do mine. It's 16 Hillside Place.
16 Hillside. Okay,
Yeah,
so
not 16B, but
so keep in mind, this GIS is pulling from a national database. So click on Norwalk. I can't just confine it to Norwalk. You can see there's a Westport, there's a Darien and a Weston. Make sure you click that. It's going to zoom in right to your property. It kind of went right in the middle, but then you just have to click on the property. And so up here, and it for some reason, we can't get this quirk in the program to work out. Sometimes it pops up the existing zone. Sometimes it does the proposed zone. In this case, it pops up the existing zone, which is the D residence. Down below that is a link to the D zone regulations. Below that is the schedule, which tells you how big all the buildings can be in D. But then if you click on this little arrow up at the top, this takes you to the proposed zoning. So it's telling you you were in the D zone. Right, click there. So you were in D right now, and then you're proposed to go into what's called CD4. And then if you clicked right here, it'll take you exactly to the CD4 regulations, and it shows you kind of some of the stuff we looked at, but then there's just all the things related to the CD4 and how they all play out. And then the last thing it takes you to, which I can zoom in on, which I talked about, was the use table. So this opening part tells you how to use the use table. And this is the actual use table on the page we looked at. Hopefully that's legible for everybody. Up at the top is all the zones, as I mentioned. And then down below are all the uses, and these are the uses related to residential, and it tells you if something's permitted, not permitted, permitted with limitations, or by special permit. And it's broken down by all sorts of categories. It goes into office type of uses, recreational uses, there's industrial, commercial, parking related, retail. So everything's there, and you just need to go through the order on that, and then the zones stay
So,
consistent.
Steve, do you mind bringing that back up real quick?
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned earlier, the idea of a corner store like a bodega is very central to walkability. It unlocks a lot, a lot of walkability in a neighborhood, and I wanted to make sure that we're clear about where that lives here.
If I can find exactly how that's categorized, I can do that for sure. Let's see.
It's somewhere in commercial, right?
Yeah, and I would tell you that there is an error in the table already with some of those uses in that zone. They actually, because it's permitted with limitations, and the limitation is really related to how big they can be. And
Okay.
they actually flag the wrong limitation, so that when the final draft comes out, that'll get corrected. I just want to make sure, I think I'm going the wrong direction. Yeah.
Yeah, you're looking at residential, and then we've got lodging. There's commercial.
So restaurant, so, okay, yeah. So as I mentioned, it's permitted with, if everybody can see my cursor right here, you're in this, we were talking about the CD4 zone.
Yeah.
And it's allowed with limitation. The limitation should be just the size. So I think the number was 2,500 square feet. But they flagged it to the wrong limitation. So we noted that, and the final version will have that corrected.
Gotcha. So, but like a small neighborhood grocery store, I guess when you say bodega, a bodega in the city, in New York City, could mean a small grocery store. It could mean a small deli, and usually it's both, right?
Yeah.
But let's say it's a grocery store that isn't a restaurant. Where would that live? Like a convenience store,
Yeah, let's see. So yeah, personal service establishment would also fall under that, and that would probably fall under retail sales.
Retail sales. Okay. And as far as you know, that the limitation in all of those cases is just square footage.
Right, and one nice thing I didn't mention, anybody who's dealt with our current regulations, is they're really, the definitions there are very sparse.
Okay.
The good thing with this set of regulations is everything is defined. So
Yeah.
if there's a term that's used in the regulation, there should be a definition for it in the back. So
Yeah,
I
in
think
Article
that's
9,
very
right?
helpful for people. Yeah.
Gotcha. So for example, I've got it right here. If we look up restaurant, does it show up?
It should.
Yes. An establishment engaged in preparing, serving, and selling food at retail or for on or off premises consumption. Such restaurant may include, as an accessory use, one bar, for example. Anyway, just wanted to use that as an example, and especially one that's relevant to walkability. So I want to check in on the time. We're actually over time already for this item. Although we do have an extra 20 minutes in the agenda. The total agenda items take up an hour and 5 minutes, and our meeting is always an hour and a half. So I'm gonna, I guess, I don't know if we can strictly vote, but I think it's in our best interest to dedicate the rest of that slush time to letting commissioners, and then if there's time, members of the public, to ask follow-up questions to Steve. Anybody think that's a bad idea? All right, I'm gonna move forward with that then. Paul, I saw your hand up. I hope that we can get to you, but like I said, I do want to prioritize commissioners. I've got several questions written down, but I'll let other people go first, other commissioners. Don't all jump at once. Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tanner. Hey, Steve, how are you? It's an impressive map, the interactive one. I guess a couple questions. I'm wondering why you're using the CD designation as opposed to like something like the urban transect, which is a little bit of a, I guess, a policy wonk question, but that's, answer that at your convenience. In the CB zone, where you were talking about the adding the duplexes into the whatever the new zone designation is, would duplexes also be able to have ADUs? I guess
No.
is one question. And then one other thing with that, you were talking about the sustainability metrics. I'm just wondering if there's any thought to the increased cost of, a lot of sustainability measures and how that factors into smaller projects that might try and, be infill development, and how you're accommodating that, because, adding just whatever it is, it's like one of the things I know from just several friends in neighboring municipalities that have tried to build, even houses, is like the cost of drainage infrastructure is, cost prohibitive for houses of a certain size. So it's like you start to try and look at, even building a small house on a new lot, or new build on an infill lot, and it could be a substantial portion of your budget that's in stuff that you're not even seeing, dealing with drainage infrastructure and new drainage manuals in places like Stamford. So just wondering, how you're looking to facilitate smaller development rather than larger parcels getting amalgamated into larger developments, and just allowing people that are trying to build duplexes be able to build them without overly cumbersome sustainability requirements that might cost a lot, or drainage requirements that might also impact your bottom line, and therefore make the housing just unaffordable to people that are trying to develop not affordable housing, big A, but affordable housing, low A.
Yeah, so
I guess
I
that,
did-
and that's it for my couple questions. Thanks.
I'm gonna pull up, because your first question's a good one. The Transex one, because I copied this slide from a earlier presentation. And I added the Transex slide in afterwards. So let me pull up this other one, which she'll show you. Yeah. All right. Okay, so it was a good question. I didn't copy that in, but so the CD designation it's part of a transect. And so what this means, this is like not the full spectrum of what you could see. So form-based code kind of follows this transect. So on the image on the right is this particular consulting firm's transect, where CD1 is like you're in Montana and you own 100 acres and this is your property. Where you're in next one is CD2, which is you're still pretty rural, but it's not quite wide open spaces. And then we're starting to get into what we have our designation to CD3, which is somewhat suburban. And then CD4 we talked about is like a moderately scaled multifamily. CD5 is like our downtown core. And then there's a CD6 when you're starting to get into New York City kind of density and scale. So that we're that's just a different transect model, but it's the same principle. The second question, if you're in the new CD3 zone, you can't do an ADU if you do a 2-family. So that's the other, for us, that's the kind of selling point in terms of, a lot of people saying, oh, you're increasing density. Well, we're like, well, we're actually not increasing density, because the B zone properties right now already allow ADUs, whether they're attached or detached. So we're saying if you do a 2-family, you can't do an ADU.
Got it. Okay.
And the last thing is sustainability. The Planning and Zoning Commission has been really pushing this a lot. And I'll be quite honest, I am not an expert on any of this. And I don't know if there is an expert on exactly what the impacts are. So what we're actually going to do at one of those June public hearings, I think we're going to do like an 1.5-hour roundtable discussion on sustainability. And we're bringing in, I have just trying to narrow down the folks right now. We have a couple of developers we're talking to, a small scale and a larger scale. And then also some folks that do the installation piece of it and understand the tax credits and everything works. And to have like a 1.5-hour roundtable on all the impacts and what it all means, what's realistic for certain type projects or not. So I'd like to have that conversation just for educational purposes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that's an important part of it. And it's not, it's not that it's one way or the other. Just, I think the past 20 years of zoning and development have borne out a lot of things that, people are really starting to realize some of the impacts of certain practices, and I'd hate to see sustainability be one of those ones that, we look back in 10 or 15 years and see that, it was really a bad idea to force people to do sustainability just across the board. It's like there's, it's not that I'm against sustainability in any means, but it's like, it's layers, right? It's like every layer of anything costs more money, whether it's design, whether it's, building a wall. It's like, just, okay, I want to add more sound resistance to my wall. So I add another layer of drywall because it puts more mass in the wall and it deadens the sound. Well, you know what? It's like I just doubled my cost of building the wall by adding another layer of drywall. You can pretty much apply that across the board, right? So it's like as soon as you're adding more layers of stuff that people have to comply with, it's like, it benefits the larger developer more than it benefits the smaller developer. So the person that's going to be, I'm not necessarily talking directly to you, just talking to the commission, where it's, those things are not, they hurt the people that are trying to build the more affordable housing, I guess,
So,
is the de
Colin,
facto affordable housing. So
in
it's
the
like,
interest
it's
of
increased.
actually answering your question, Colin,
Yeah.
it looks like the two biggest sustainability rules that have already been incorporated into the draft only apply to projects with an area of 25,000 square feet or more, which is not the
Correct.
small developers that you're talking about, I think.
Well, is that land area or is that project size? Because that's a half acre.
That's
Um,
project.
That's project
But
size.
that's, yeah, part of it's the parking lots on there too for the solar.
Yeah, so, yeah, is it
So-
total square footage?
So that's land area. When you say project size, Steve, you mean land area?
Yeah, so if the building is 25,000 square feet, or the parking lot surface area.
Or the combination of the two?
No, individual. As far, look, that's how it's proposed. I don't know where or how it shakes out, but that's what's proposed.
Okay, well,
Yep,
Colin, I would
okay.
encourage you to
So
go.
I can yield at this point. I just wanted to put that out there that, it sounds like Steve's having those conversations and,
Yeah.
People should understand that there's monetary stuff associated with that to, the developer, whoever the developer is, whether it's a private homeowner or whether it's whoever. And if, you're making it too expensive for them to do these things, it's like the projects aren't going to happen because they're not going to be able to afford them.
Yeah, solar panels are great, but if no buildings get built because it's too expensive, you get no solar panels.
Exactly.
Judd, go ahead.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for this. It's all looks good overall. And you may have answered this question early on. I came in 20 minutes late, but how are you defining the difference between an ADU and a two-family?
So ADUs are two things. ADUs can be attached. They have size limitations where a two-family doesn't, or an ADU can be detached. And that also has a smaller footprint than an attached would have.
And what's the square footage for the ADUs?
That's a good question, and I'm gonna guess the wrong answer.
I'll
I
take
have to look it up. It's in the zoning regs. It might, I think it's 1,000 for an attached, and I'm gonna say 7 or maybe even 9 for the detached. I have to look.
Okay, that's
If
still
you email me, I can send you the exact
okay.
piece.
Still a good size. And then the elimination of parking requirements in what I'm going to call the two historic districts, Washington Street and Wall Street areas. That opens up those buildings for almost any use, either office or residential on the upper floors. Do I understand that correctly, with no parking requirements?
Right. So right now I know in Wall Street for sure, if you change the use, you don't have to provide parking. Part of the thing with both of those two zones is the height, like, how tall the building can be on either of those two zones, or those two portions of the zones is limited in comparison to what the rest of the zone is. And the real reason for that is we want to kind of protect those buildings as much as possible.
Okay, so if I wanted to build, if I owned a building in the Wall Street district, historic 3-4 story building there, and I wanted to put a series of 325 square foot studio apartments in there, more or less I could do that without any kind of parking requirements.
Right, so long as the, you know, you don't not knocking the building down. and
Yeah,
stuff.
no, preserving the building and making the building a viable, you know, property where it might not be otherwise.
Right, on those parcels that are on the map, yes.
Right, okay, that's great. All right, thank you.
To answer the question from earlier, it looks based on section 4F 410 right here. 80 attached ADUs are 1,000 square feet maximum, detached 700 square foot maximum. Steve, do you know what this means? There's another rule about attached and detached.
Attached and detached.
So if your ADU is simultaneously attached and not attached,
Can you have more than one ADU on a,
No,
no,
no, I think that's just regulating if the, because a lot of times the ADU, if it can be within the building, so it could be the ground, the basement, it could be an ADU. I think that's what that's saying is if you attach it to the building, you're capped at 700. If it's just like, they're almost treating it as like a separate structure at that point.
well, so how does that differ from
That's
Part 10
a
right
good
here?
question. I'm gonna go back and yell at Brian in my office, who is the grand poobah of all things accessory dwelling units, and
Okay.
I'll look for clarification there.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just a typo.
Yeah, and there's a lot of typos in here, so feel free if you see one to yell at us.
So I've got a couple of questions that I'm gonna try and blaze through really quick because we only got 2 minutes left. So you and I had a conversation a little while ago. Or I'll wait until you're done so you can make that note.
No, go ahead.
You and I had a conversation a little while ago about bike parking, specifically about how there's a precedent that's starting to take hold in the United States and other usually more progressive cities about using bicycle parking to count toward parking minimums. For example, I think I sent you the example of Madison, Wisconsin, where the up to half of the parking in their like urban zone, up to half of the car parking requirement can be substituted with bike parking requirement at like a 4-to-1 exchange rate. So basically, if a building would require 20 parking spots, 10 of those spots can be replaced by 40 bicycle parking spots at a 4-to-1 ratio. Is that something you considered including?
Not to that extent. I will say, you know, like the meeting I was at, I've been at a couple different meetings where they've been really pushing back on the parking, even at the current standard for multifamily is kind of 1.3 per unit. You can drop it down for multifamily or mixed use. You can drop it down to 1 space per unit with certain affordable housing provisions. But we've been getting pushed back even at the 1.3. My guess would be, I don't think people's opinion is fully aligned with that viewpoint at right now.
Okay, is the pushback that you're getting on parking from people who are afraid that there won't be enough parking? Well,
Right, and it'll spill over into other areas.
I see. Because I'm sure that you're familiar, but in case you're not, and for everybody else's sake, that like there is a growing trend of cities around the nation that are completely doing away with their parking requirements. Basically based on the idea that a few different ideas. One, that historically they have been way too high, and so we've built way too much parking. But also that it's hard to get the number right, and that a lot of the numbers that have been picked completely arbitrarily. For example, like the number of parking spots at a bowling alley. You know, how many parking spots do you require per lane of a bowling alley? Like there's how do you make a scientific judgment on that? And maybe actually that's a good question for you to answer. You know, when you were looking at the parking requirements, especially for non-residential uses, how do you come up with those numbers?
Yeah, so a lot of those are, you know, and I agree, there's a little bit of arbitrary thinking built into that. The one number I think for us is actually has some data behind it and actually makes sense is our mixed use or multifamily, which is, as I mentioned, the 1.3 per unit. That's based on two different things. One, in talking to developers over the years, and certain developers, they could not get financing if they didn't provide at least 1.3 spaces per unit.
Yeah, but that's not a reason for the city to require it.
No, but the other piece is that, and my predecessors and prior staff had actually gone out and done counts themselves during evenings, during weekends, at different times of the day. And the 1.3 number was a solid number based on the parking counts that they did.
Sure, although I would argue that that's not even necessarily a good rationale for requiring that much parking. Just because people are using something that their developer was required by law to provide and that they probably get for free, doesn't mean that that's the optimal trade-off for that part of the city, especially if it's an urban area, and especially if we were trying to move people from driving as much as they are to other modes of transportation. I guess my concern is that by requiring the parking by law, we are kind of we're committing, both in terms of policy and in terms of like the built environment that, you know, only changes once every couple of decades. We're committing to a certain level of car use. And in our most urban core, like I wouldn't propose that we get rid of parking requirements in the outer lying regions. But like, for example, when I see the specific lots that we've picked out to the historic lots on Wall Street and on Washington Street, where there is no parking requirement under the new proposed regs, my reaction is those are some of the most valuable parts of our city. Those are the parts that people come to spend time in. Those are the parts that are the most walkable. And part of the reason that they're walkable and part of the reason that people value them is because there's this critical density that you get by not requiring the parking. And that allows the density of amenities and allows the density of experiences so that walking is interesting. And if we want more of those places that people value, then I think that we need to allow them to be built. And if we're going to require, you know, say one spot per unit, if it's a residential or 1.3 spots per unit, then that basically precludes us from building more streets like Washington Street or like Wall Street.
So I mentioned with and some projects have already taken advantage of this reduction. You can go down to 1 space per unit. And we didn't spend much time talking about it, but in proximity to transit, the regulations have built in a further reduction that someone can take advantage of. So there are
Sure, but that only goes up to like a quarter of the required parking, right? And that's only like a tiny radius around the Sono station.
I mean, I haven't done the numbers on some of the recent projects approved, but if you took out a quarter of the spaces on some of these projects, I probably get you closer to that 1.0 number versus the 1.3.
Sure, but that's still in an urban context, that's still a ton of parking, right? Like if you have how much square footage does 2 parking spots actually take up? It's, you know, hundreds of square feet, you know, to put 2 cars in. And you know, that could be comparable to an entire apartment. Like we're talking about an amount of space, amount of floor area allocated for the parking that's comparable to the amount of floor area allocated for the people living there. And even if that's only 1 per unit, it's still like in the same ballpark, which means that an appreciable fraction of the mass of the building is dedicated to parking. Even at what we're talking about are very low in relative terms parking requirements. You see where I'm coming from?
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm saying that, but there's also, you know, from our perspective, you know, pushing the entire package forwards, trying to walk a fine line between all the different points of view. So,
of course. I'm just trying to make sure that this point of view is articulated. Go ahead, Jed.
Steve, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe particularly over the last 10 years, the zoning commission, independent of this rewrite, has reduced parking requirements little by little and altered them over time. And is that correct, Steve?
Yeah, we've lowered it down. Yeah.
So that, you know, that may continue because in general, when you talk about eliminating parking requirements, in my experience, most people think you're going to eliminate all parking and they panic. And as I think, you know, we've now eliminated parking requirements in the historic districts. That's a great step in the right direction, and the general public can see how our urban core responds to that, which in every case that I've read about it, it's been a positive thing. And, you know, in a few years, maybe that can be expanded. So as Steve said, I think trying to push all of that through right now would be pretty tough sell.
Yeah, it's a fair
One-
point. Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, just one add on to that, kind of related to the bike parking credit. Has there been any consideration in this to car share credit? Like one car share would be equal to 4 spaces or something?
No, I think we had preliminary conversations early on, but I don't think it went very far, but you know, it's something, definitely a suggestion. If you want to put it in, I think would get consideration.
I mean, similarly,
Thank
there's precedent for like a fee in lieu of parking that a developer could provide. I don't think we've ever done it in Norwalk, but I've
We
seen
have
it
it.
in other places. Oh, we do.
Hey, Tanner, just to hop in real quick, just for the aspect of time, you know, just remember, guys, also
Oh,
Steve's
yes, thank
also
you.
hosting other public meetings that you can also
Um,
attend. I know everybody has a lot to say about this. And, you know, Steve, I appreciate you hopping on tonight. And, you know, I
No
just want to
problem.
make sure we keep on the agenda for other items. I don't want to, Steve's got meetings pretty much 3-4 nights out of the week, so I don't want to take too much of his time up. But there's our other meetings as well. You guys could also attend and you know, make suggestions and you know, suggest recommendations.
Sure. And we've got other agenda items that we're now eating into.
Yes.
So thank you for the time check, Greg. But Steve, I'll let you respond before we let you go.
Oh, yeah, we do have, there's been fee in lieu on, and we actually revised it when we did the West Ave Wall Street plan. Fee in lieu works sometimes, and it just, I don't know, it's a tricky formula to try to get the best ratio. We're actually thinking about it again right now on what if and when Water Street redevelops. So that might be something that gets kicked around there as well.
Gotcha. Okay, good to know that it's on the mind. Okay, well, I want to thank Steve for coming. I think that we are all grateful for your time, Steve, for all the work that's gone into the rewrite, for all the considerations of all these little edge cases and taking all of the different points of view into consideration. It's definitely not an easy task. Thank you for doing it, and thanks for coming to our meeting.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So without further ado, I'm going to move to our next agenda item, which is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. And I believe this is Greg. I asked for this to be on the agenda. Just for quick context, the Federal Department of Transportation recently announced their latest Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. There's a massive amount of money that's available to municipalities to make their streets safer. So I was interested to know what TMP is planning if they're going to try and apply for this grant. Go ahead, Greg.
Hi, Tanner. So yeah, so we are applying for this grant and we actually did submit it on the previous round and we're resubmitting it again as they're opening it up again for projects again. So we submitted a grant for a streetscape project along Main Street from White Street all the way up to Route 123 New Canaan Avenue. So Main Street from Route 1 Cross Street up to New Canaan Avenue is all Route 123 State Route. And then from Cross Street South to Hoyt Street, that is all City Road, Main Street. So it kind of combines that. And if you look at the aerial, you can see that it also will connect with the Wall Street neighborhood project streetscape project that we're putting together as well. So it kind of creates that connectivity between the two projects there that we kind of just build off of.
Is this accurate then, Greg? You said Hoyt Street to Cross Street all the way to New Canaan Ave?
Correct. Yeah, it's about 3/4 of a mile.
Great.
So that's a streetscape project that includes basically implementing attractive streetscape features that improve the built environment. You know, that kind of builds up that you know, that a lot of those small retail shops that lie along the corridor. You don't see a lot of the big box retail stores along this corridor. They're mostly small retail businesses and small restaurants along the corridor. And the project, you know, is basically implements wider sidewalks, grass strips, amenity areas, bump outs, recessed parking, underground utilities, street trees, and pedestrian level lighting. Obviously, you know, in this area, there's a lot of open asphalt in this area. But there's also on-street parking that's very vital along this corridor just because of the lack of off-street parking that's available here. So the businesses really, you know, that they they really need that on-street parking, to be able to have that, that in and out, traffic. And, we're just building up, our grant proposal was built up more of the, making sure that, wider sidewalks, a buffer between, the vehicular traffic, and then you have the parking, and then you have amenity area that includes ped level lighting, benches, trash cans, all those amenities in that area that don't obstruct the sidewalk. Where today you have kind of some of those narrow sidewalks where some obstructions are in the way. So this grant that we went out with kind of hits on that. And then also this is a very heavily used public transit corridor as well for the transit district. So we look at considerations for improving bus stop, pull-in areas, and nothing set in stone. It's very high level conceptual, corridor that overall plan that we have. But obviously once as the plan continues to develop and we do a complete corridor analysis and traffic counts and crash data analysis, that will kind of evolve the project. But this is this is a pretty major corridor here that carries a lot of traffic, and especially that connects, two state routes. And it is a state route, between Cross Street and New Canaan Avenue. So it's a pretty highly trafficked area. And, we want to, we went at this very aggressively and asked for, a good amount of money to make sure that we carry all the planning, the design work, all the survey work, and make sure we really improve this corridor and kind of build upon what we're planning on doing on Wall Street, which you've all seen is, pretty, a pretty comprehensive project within itself. So we basically want to continue this project all the way up to New Canaan Avenue as well through this corridor as well. So we're hoping that the application hits and we're able to do this project in the coming years.
So Greg, what have you done differently with this application? What gives you hope that it'll be accepted this time around, given that it wasn't last time around?
Well, I mean, it's not that it wasn't accepted the first time around. They're just doing another round for this time around. And then they've kind of expanded the scope a little bit because this was one of the first ones that they put out for this project, for this grant. So they've made some minor changes to it. So we're just putting out, we're just basically resubmitting the same application with just because they're opening it back up again because they made some minor adjustments to it from the first round that they did.
Yeah, adjustments to the grant program.
The grant program, correct? Yep.
Gotcha. But but they opened it up last year, and you submitted an application. You weren't awarded a grant, correct?
Correct. Yes.
But so do you attribute that mostly to just the fact that there's
I mean, just think of every municipality from high density, high populated cities all the way to small cities across the country are all applying.
Yeah, I'm sure the funds are very limited.
So it's,
but it seems like a compelling project to me, but I'm not the
it's
one.
It is. And, just think for every project like this, there's, hundreds of other cities just like us across the country that are applying for a grant like this.
Yeah, Carly's got her hand up. She might have some good context. Go ahead, Carly.
Hi, Tanner and everyone. Yes, I just wanted to add two things. One, we will be applying for this through TMP and the redevelopment agency this year. And last year it went through WestCog.
Cool.
So there's a bit of a difference there. And second, it is it's not due until July 10th, but we will be asking for a letter of recommendation from the Bike Walk Commission. So, while we're talking about that, if you want to approve it now instead of waiting for the next meeting to get that out of the way.
I think that because it's a special meeting, maybe we can because it is on the agenda. Greg?
Do
we have a quorum? We do have a quorum.
I mean, we have a quorum. It is on the agenda. I mean, I'll allow it, but I don't know if Darlene, if you have any, what do you think about it?
I think I'm just gonna do it. I'll take the flak for it if it ends up being inappropriate.
Okay.
And also, admittedly, in the past, I have written letters of recommendation that we didn't vote on because they were very clearly in the best interest of the Bike Walk Commission. Judd's got his hand up though. Go ahead, Judd.
Tanner, you want to add this to the agenda?
We can't because it's a special meeting.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Christine, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Greg. I just, is the line there, is that the end of the project where that line ends?
No, this is the corridor. This is the scope of the project. It runs along Main Street from the southern end at Hoyt Street here up to New Canaan Ave.
No, right, so it ends at New Canaan Avenue, because I just think something that would make a robust application would be that you have the senior housing in here, or the disability housing by the cemetery, and you also have another one just a little further up. So there's a need there for a lot for pedestrians there that are not in cars.
Yeah,
Besides-
Christine, we can't, we have to stick, we can't do every single street along the corridor along.
No, my point, I guess my point is to bolster the application to mention that it's there.
Well, I'd have to look back through the application and see if we called out and how did the application's pretty lengthy, so I'm sure, because we usually call out all the, the highly
Area.
trafficked
Okay.
areas
Mhm.
in the, along the corridor, so I'm sure we called it out.
All right, thanks.
Carly, go ahead. You still got your hand up?
No, I meant to take it down. I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
sure how to do that.
Then I'll entertain a motion to approve that I or one other commissioner writes a letter of support for this grant as described by Greg and Carly.
I'll make a motion.
Thanks, Judd. Do I have a second?
I'll second it, yes.
Yeah, I
I'll
don't think you
second
can
it.
second your motion, but
Oh.
yeah,
I'll second it.
Colin can. Emily's voted in favor. All in favor?
All right,
I,
Okay, that is a quorum. Christine, we didn't get a vote from you. Okay, that's a hand from Christine. Great. So that passes unanimously. Thank you, Greg and Carly, for working on that. As I'm sure we all agree, we hope that this gets awarded so that we can see these streetscape improvements. They'll be great.
Great, thanks. And I'll send you more information on the letter of support.
Thanks. Greg, anything else you wanted to say on that? Or are you good?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, we do have a question in the chat from Anthony, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and read that out because I think it's good and relevant. And Greg, this question's for you, and it pertains to the grant application, but it may also pertain to, just generally in the city. Is there any plan to include bollards to increase pedestrian safety? It's often pretty scary on the sidewalks in that neighborhood due to the crashes. Is that something that's ever been on the mind?
So for this one, no, because what we'll have is not only will we have a wide sidewalk, we'll also have a 4-foot amenity area, which will have pedestrian level lighting, street trees, and then you'll have on-street parking. So you'll have 12 feet of space between the vehicular traffic and the pedestrians, and you'll have that buffer between them. So it won't be asphalt, between the sidewalk and then the street. You'll have that extra room for amenity, and then you'll have the parked cars as well.
Yep. Carly, your hand's up.
Nope, I just don't know how to take it down. I hit it, but
Oh.
it's not going down.
Let me see if I can do it. I can't do it. Delene, if you can lower Carly's hand, feel free to. I'm gonna move along, Ben. If we have some extra time, I'll come back to you, but I don't think we will, unfortunately.
Yeah, no
we've got
problem.
2 agenda items still. NRVT crossing Route 1, Belden Avenue at Route 7. So Christine asked for this to be on the agenda. I've also gotten several different people giving me feedback about this. For context for people, this is actually pretty close to where we were just talking about. This is the crossing of the NRVT right here. It's the new section of NRVT, and it uses the existing crosswalk. As you can see, it's a pretty long crosswalk. It crosses no fewer than 5 lanes of traffic and a median, which is often treated as a turn lane. So it's a long crossing, and the feedback that I've gotten from people is that cars coming, I think, in both directions often do not realize that there are people crossing there because they are turning right on a red light, which is technically legal, but it is unsafe because there are, a lot more pedestrians using this crosswalk now. So I was going to give Greg the chance to respond to that.
Yeah, so you're right, Taryn. It is a very long crossing, across, a state route nonetheless, which you have a lot of traffic coming off of Route 7, and then also traffic coming up from Belden Avenue. And then those continuing from Cross Street onto Route 1 on Belden Avenue as well. So there is a lot of vehicular traffic coming through here. So I did have a chance to speak with our signal engineer, Fred Strongi, today. And I did talk to him about just the signal equipment that is on this at this particular intersection. So it is upgraded. About 8 years ago, the signals were upgraded. It was, as you see across the city right now, we are doing a lot of work to upgrade the signals with a lot more technology and a lot better signalization, especially timing wise for pedestrians and vehicular traffic. This signal was kind of more on the older side of the new technology that has been put in. So that was about 8 years ago when this signal was put in. So when the current configuration has a concurrent operation, which vehicles are permitted to turn right or left across the crosswalk when the walk sign is showing. The drivers are supposed to yield the right of way to anybody who's in the crosswalk, obviously. Unfortunately, vehicles don't always do that. So over the next few years, this signal is slated to be upgraded to allow for, exclusive pedestrian crossing so that so all vehicular traffic is stopped on red. So they aren't allowed to actually cross here. But right now with the current signal configuration, it's unfortunately just set up that way where, on a concurrent signalized intersection, it's, vehicles take the right on red while pedestrians are allowed to cross, but the vehicles are supposed to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. But just from looking at the aerial, it's a long crosswalk. It's far too long for, especially for a trail crossing. It's a tough, between, like you said, 5 lanes and a median as well. That should be something, at least a refuge island in the middle or something to accommodate that type of crossing. Because very limited amount of people are able to cross there. So no denying that it's a tough crossing there for pedestrians and cyclists alike. But unfortunately, the way that the signals can, currently set up, even for an exclusive crossing, 24 seconds, that's not a lot of time for that long of a crossing there, especially if you're walking. So,
Yes, I think we're in agreement about all of that.
Yeah.
What we would love for TMP to tell us is if there are any solutions at hand.
Well, there are solutions. The thing is, you have to work with the state on this one as well, because it is a state Route 1, and Route 7 as well, the off ramp. So it's not as easy as us just going out there and doing some hard infrastructure.
Can we request that you start that discussion, because this is vastly becoming a usable asset in the city, and
Right, yeah.
I don't accept that waiting for the traffic signalization upgrade is really going to do anything. It's a design issue with the intersection.
I totally,
we all agree that.
Yeah, let's let Greg respond.
I totally understand that, Colin, but we recognize it's that. There's also, a dozen other intersections, people are saying the same thing that want to change as well. So we just have a limited budget where we can't just go out and do every project at one time. That's just not possible. We're trying to address, we have the small concrete project that we're trying to address a lot of these upgrades with, but we have a limited budget, to address a lot of these projects. We can't go out one day and do them all. It's just not possible. So
Greg, are you able to
agree that it's an issue, but we're trying to do our best.
Are you able to foresee, like, once the budget comes around to this project, once you're able to prioritize this project, do you have an idea of what the solution will likely be?
Well, just looking at high level, there's, a lot of things, like I said, there could be refuge islands, some bump outs, some curb extensions, just to shorten the crossing there, but we don't even know what the volumes are coming in each direction. That's a major thing. What's the crash data look like? Obviously with the NRVT there's a lot more crossings, there from pedestrians and cyclists alike. So, without knowing a lot of the data, that will give us a better idea of what needs to be done. From high level, you can propose conceptual things to be done, but until we actually look at the numbers and see what the counts are and crash data, it's hard to come with a solution right here, right now, because we want to make sure we do it right. We don't just want to take quick actions and say, oh, well, this is the best thing we can do now, so let's just get it done. We want to make sure it's the right thing.
Yeah, I know that that's an ongoing conversation about like, what the, how long the trade-off between having a solution quickly that allows us to get feedback and a solution that takes longer is more long-term, but has more evidence behind it. I think that
Right.
that's not a productive conversation to continue right now.
No,
But
It's,
I do
like I
want
said,
to,
this is new, obviously it's been coming up a lot more, but we have a lot of other projects we're working on right now, and this is just and limited money, and we've
Yeah.
already, committed a
we-
lot of money to other projects.
we all see that. One thing I will mention though, is that several people from TMP as well as I are on the Complete Streets Design Guide Steering Committee, and we met a couple of weeks ago. And one of the core projects within that process is a demonstration project that will include more of the temporary or quick build experimental or interventional approaches that the commission has asked for before. And they, on the steering committee, the consultant has asked for ideas of places where we could do such a demonstration project, and perhaps this is a good candidate. So I'll take note of that and make sure to bring it up. Greg, feel free to bring it up as well.
Yep.
In that context. Did we lose Audrey? No, Audrey's still here. Audrey, you mentioned that you had a public comment from the beginning of the meeting on this subject, so I'll let you go first. You're muted though.
Yes, it was about that intersection. I know a lot's been discussed since. There are a number of intersections around the city where there shouldn't really be a turn on red when there's a pedestrian crossing. I just got a comment from a friend who was in Bridgeport today. And when the green walk signal was for the pedestrian, there was a lit sign for the traffic that said no turn on red. So I know that's a piece of equipment, and I know
We
Greg-
have those at,
Yeah.
at Connecticut Ave, at West Avenue, we have those where it's,
Yeah.
it says yield to pedestrians, they're blank out signs, but that's also because, for a configuration such as this, I don't know if this is able to allow that type of technology on this type of signal, because like technology that you mentioned, Audrey, that's more newer technology. I don't know if this is upgraded enough to conform to that type of technology. That would be a better question for our.
That's Bridgeport. Bridgeport's ahead of us.
No, they're not ahead. No, but Audrey, I don't think that's a fair assessment, because that's just one signal. Okay, like I said before, this is an 8-year-old signal. That signal Bridgeport put in might have just went installed recently. We have those signals on certain intersections.
Right,
We just don't have it on this one intersection. We don't have it yet.
right,
We've been upgrading signals all over the city.
right.
Hey,
Well, we
this
can-
one's just not this one's just not coming up as of yet, because compared to other signals, this one's actually newer than a lot of other signals in the city, especially on Route 1.
Right. Well, it is an issue all over. It's not just Norwalk. In
No, it
general,
is. And
when pedestrians have right of way, shouldn't have cars turning into them. It's like the Vision Zero equation that we make it safe for pedestrians, we make it safe for everybody. So I just hope we can do more. That's all.
No, and we are, Audrey. I'm not saying we're not, and we agree. We recognize that this is not the best crossing and the signal isn't where it should be. We recognize that. We just, time, money, budget, it's just difficult to send out and upgrade all these signals all at once.
Right. I guess we'll have to come up with some grassroots efforts to make that safer somehow. I know in front of the Fox Run School, they have a bucket on either side with a orange flag that they wave as they go across and drop it on the other side.
So Audrey, I think Greg's point though is
Yeah.
that like there are lots of solutions like that. I'm sure that
Yeah.
Greg's familiar with that. It's in the resources that he used to become educated enough to get the job that he's got. The
Right.
point is that all those different solutions, they solve the same problem in different contexts, and in a different context, it may not work as well. For example, the flags probably would not work well here, but I don't know that for sure. I'm not a professional, but in order to understand what the best solution is according to what's been done in other cities, Greg would have to collect a certain amount of information. And yes, that may not take that long to do, but when there's 10 or 20 or 30 intersections that people are asking, that becomes a lot of work and you got to prioritize that work, right? But I think that we're all aligned on the fact that this is a dangerous intersection and that it needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
So, Christine, go ahead, and then
I
we'll
know,
go to
real
the-
quick, I just had this idea. What if we just won't have the NRVT put up a little sign on each side of that warning people that's right on red there to just be super cautious? That's one idea. And then the other thing is, Greg, would it help to have the public like us call the state to facilitate, to accelerate this, take it off you?
Potentially, I just don't know who at the state, because there's obviously different, different entities at the state. So, I mean, let me discuss this internally with the TNP team and just see what the best action is forward. And just see how we can address this sooner rather than later. Listen, we don't like saying, oh, we don't have time to do this right now, but we want to make sure it's done right, especially at an intersection like this with this many vehicles, with this many lanes. We want it done right. So we need to measure and look at the data before any decision is made.
Greg, to put a cap on this and move on, would you mind just proactively putting the same topic on the agenda for next time, just so that we
Sure.
can get an update? Even
Yep.
if the update is, it's still on the back burner.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's certainly fine.
Okay.
And Tanner, could you, I think we should loop Jim Carpenter into that as well, like
Jim-
somebody from the
Jim Carter.
NRVT.
From the NRVT.
Carter, sorry. Yeah, because I mean, it's like, I think Christine said it best. It's like, take some of that burden off of them. It's like, that was where I was trying to get to, was like, Greg doesn't necessarily, I would just wanted to hear that TMP is open to starting the conversation, and maybe Jim Carpenter has resources and traffic counts from the NRVT crossing that they studied at this location that they can contribute, and they can work with the state. And, since they've already gotten the trail across, it's like,
I mean, the
there's
city is the
probably
one
some
who managed the
discussions that could get
construction
reopened.
of this section. So I'm sure that Jim has, it is very well versed in this, but I'm sure also that to the extent that he has stuff that the city doesn't, that the city is already in contact with him. But Greg, if you wouldn't mind making sure that in future communication about this, that you loop in people like Jim Carter from NRVT.
Yeah, no, we definitely will.
Great. Okay, let's move on. We got one more agenda item, and that is the Seaview Ave Complete Streets project update.
Yes, so I don't know if anybody saw any of the social media posts from Friday, but we have put a save the date out. We're having our second public meeting for the Seaview Avenue Complete Streets project on Monday, May 22nd. That's going to be from 5 to 8. It's going to be split into 2 sessions that night. The first session from 5 p.m. To about 6 p.m. The project team is going to do a walkthrough along the Seaview Avenue corridor and just discuss the existing conditions and what we're proposing along the corridor. So you can
Greg, can you just say that
visually
date
see
one more time?
Monday, May 22nd. So 2 weeks
Thank
from tonight. 2 weeks from tonight. So we'll do the walkthrough from 5 to 6, where you actually walk along the corridor with the project team, and we'll explain the existing conditions and the proposed improvements that we're proposing. And then from 6:30 to 8, we're going to do a presentation at the Sono Branch Library Community Room, and where we're actually, present do a presentation on a couple of different concepts based upon recommendations that were provided from the public and the business owners, back in October, November, December of last year, and we did the first public meeting in December last year. And then we also did a local stakeholder meeting as well last October. So we kind of took all those comments and recommendations, implemented them into our concept designs. So we're going to do a presentation on that. And then right after, following the presentation, we'll solicit feedback on the concepts again and, take all your comments for a second round. And this way you can actually see the concepts that we're proposing for the corridor itself. So I know this has been a few years in the making, but we're in the process of building the design right now. So this is just another step in the public outreach segment of the conceptual design process. So we want your feedback part of this one. Last time we wanted your recommendations. This time we want your feedback on them. So that's what we're going to be presenting. There'll be more social media posts and more information about it coming out over the next few days, but just wanted to put on everybody's calendar, and it is on social media for the save the date. And then the website also for the Seaview Avenue Complete Streets project is also on the TMP website on the city as well for other information.
Awesome, Greg. Thank you.
Hope you all could attend.
I have just added it to the calendar of events that the Bike Walk Commission maintains. And just for everybody's context, if you go to walknorwalk.org or bikenorwalk.org, you will land on this page. There are lots of links, including, for example, the zoning regulations update, a link to our Zoom meeting, and it has been updated for our next meeting already. Thank you, Emily. And we've got a link to the calendar events right here. So, for example, if you go there now, you'll see that on the 22nd, I've just added Seaview Ave Complete Street meeting. So as more details come out, I'll update that. But if you want to stay up to date on all the different biking and walking related public meetings in Norwalk, that's a great way to do it.
And then Tanner,
go
one
ahead.
other quick thing to add for the website, also too, our Complete Streets website is now live as well.
Oh, really?
Our
Let's
website, yep.
let's see it.
Went live today. I know it's not on the agenda, but
It's relevant.
it's relevant.
Is this the one?
No, so it's if you go to the if you go onto the TMP website on the
No, that's not it.
no, that's not it. No.
TMP. I don't have a link to TMP's website.
Even if you just go to the Norwalk site. Yeah, there you go. On the no, there you go. Okay, there it is. Yep, and then Complete Streets on the bottom. And there's the Seaview Avenue project. So
Indeed. Okay,
there you go.
gotcha. Nice.
Yeah, so it just has project timeline, staying involved. So we'll, this is your best, we'll obviously announce it on social media as well when we do start up our public meetings. I know Tanner, joined our first SAC meeting as well to join to start discussing Complete Streets with other, council members and other departments. So we've already kind of kicked off those meetings, and we'll start, doing public outreach and public meetings in the coming months.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. I am sad to report that I will be out of town on May 22nd for this next Seaview Avenue meeting.
Okay.
I will be in Scotland, but as a result, I encourage everybody else to please attend and to give lots of good feedback about Seaview Avenue and how we can make it more walkable and bikeable. So there's your call to action. Okay, that concludes the items on our agenda. The last thing, I guess, is a motion to adjourn. And since this is a special meeting, I will not entertain any other subjects, as that is against the law. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. If you want to
I'll
say
make a motion.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Judd.
Second.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's a
Not everybody.
quorum. That's a majority. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We'll see you June 5th is our next meeting.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Delene.
You're welcome. Have a great night.
All
Thank
right,
you.
have a good night.
See you next month.